Thank you very much, Professor Moon Choi. And like Nina, I'm really excited to be here today, and thank you to the organisers for the invitation to present to you. So my first presentation this morning, I really wanted to introduce the safe system approach that many countries around the world have implemented, and there's some of the challenges that we do have with that approach, and particularly addressing safe mobility of older drivers. But before I start, so maybe I should tell you a little bit more about myself and my centre. So as Moon Choi said, I'm the Deputy Director there, but I'll also run the PhD Graduate Research Program. So I look after all of our wonderful PhD students and all of our supervisors, and we have some fabulous PhD students and topics, and I'd invite you to have a look at our website to see the types of topics that our students are undertaking. So I have a behavioural science background, so I did psychology in my undergraduate. I'm not a clinician or a counsellor, but we really undertake more of that experimental psychology, so behavioural science, understanding how people operate in systems, but then also behaviour and attitudes, and how we can change those behaviours and attitudes when people are out on the roads. Okay, so I've just got bit of an overview of the facts, and Nina's already described some of these facts about road safety and the issues that we have. So road safety is a global public health issue. Globally, over 1.35 million people die on our roads each year, and many, many more are seriously injured, so about tenfold, so about 50 million people suffer serious injuries on our roads. And I looked up a few statistics in South Korea. So here there's about 2,500 people lose their lives here in Korea each year. And I understand that quite a proportion of that are pedestrians, so pedestrians and potentially motorcyclists. So in Australia, we have about 1,200 people losing their lives on Australia's roads each year. We have a smaller population, of course, than you, but that's still too many lives are being lost. But if we look at on the global spectrum, the great majority of the world's fatalities and serious injuries actually occur in low and middle income countries, and they only have about just under half of the world's registered vehicles. So if we're going to look on a global scale, we really should be focusing our efforts on addressing road safety in low and middle income countries. We also know as a public health issue that road fatalities and serious injuries cause enormous economic, social and community and individual costs. And there's some estimated dollars there. So, you know, some really good things, really good statistics that make us say we really do need to do something in road safety to bring those costs down. We also know that road injuries do affect all of us, but it's mostly amongst our more vulnerable populations, children, young adults and older adults. So particularly for children and young adults, and if they are seriously injured, they are going to be suffering lifelong disabilities, and again, causing massive costs to them, their families, their communities, but also the economy. Okay, so a couple of fun things. Tell me, who's been to Australia? Has anybody been to Australia? Yes, Moon Choi, I know you have. Nina? Anybody else? Yes, great. Whereabouts did you go in Australia? Perth? Great. Perth, yes. I know Moon Choi backpacked all the way from the northern Queensland right down to Melbourne quite a number of years ago. So we have some wonderful animals in Australia, and some of you would know these: kangaroos, koalas, crocodiles, wombats, but they actually cause a significant amount of crashes on Australian roads. So, you know, we have some different issues on our roads than you might see here in Korea. And the roads themselves, we have a wide variety. We're a huge country. And a very small population. So the majority of our population lives on the east coast and then over in Perth. So we've got a combination of urban roads in our big cities and regional towns, but then we have roads in the outback, as you see there, miles and miles and miles of nothing. Long straight roads with lots of kangaroos and lots of wombats and camels and all sorts of things. So, you know, so we really need to understand the diversity of our road system when we are really looking at making sure that we are addressing the road tolls and preventing injuries in a systematic way. So I want to talk about how we have made some effort in addressing the road toll, particularly in Victoria, where I'm from Melbourne, and preventing injuries. So this graph really shows what we've really done in the last 30 or 40 years. You can see at the top there, and I think that was in about 1970 odd, where we had the highest number of road fatalities. So we decided that that was too much and we would do something about it. And you can see a clear reduction over the next 30, 40 years. And you can see reductions in response to a lot of the countermeasures that we have implemented. So we've introduced things like random breath testing, mandatory seatbelt wearing, lots of enforcement. Red light cameras were introduced and installed, mobile speed cameras. In the early 2000s, we introduced lower speed limits in urban areas from 60 down to 50, and that made a huge difference. We've also introduced random breath testing, random drug testing, which has made a huge difference. So you can see how we've implemented different countermeasures and how they've affected the road toll. Now, this is a little old, it only goes up to 2010, but we are still implementing different countermeasures. Unfortunately, we're really plateauing out. So we can see that in Victoria, our number of deaths is still around that 200 odd. So we still need to make some more efforts into further reducing those deaths and serious injuries. So I think what we've tried to do in Victoria is really work together. And I think that's the main thing in forming successful partnerships with government agencies, local governments, non-government organisation, road safety advocacy, industry, and of course university-based researchers. So what we do in Victoria and Australia is we provide all of the research evidence that governments and other organisations can take to develop their policies, practices and actions. So I think our government over the years has really had a strong commitment to understanding that evidence and working very closely with the universities, knowing what that evidence is, best practice, and then translating that evidence into implementation of improved policies and practices. So in Victoria, we've implemented the Towards Zero initiative, and I guess that really brings the focus back to we're really interested in getting towards zero deaths. So our vision is zero deaths and zero serious injuries on our roads. That's a big ask, but at least we have that mission there. But it is a big ask, and so we really do need a quantum shift in the way we're thinking and the approaches that we're making to meet those road safety targets. So targets include reducing the number of people who die on our roads by 30% and reducing the numbers of seriously injured by 30%. And these figures are really very much in line with global efforts. So the WHO, the United Nations have the same sorts of targets to reduce our fatalities and serious injuries by 20 to 30% in the next 30 or so years. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the SAFE system and what it means. Before I introduce the SAFE system itself, I guess SAFE system was really predicated on these sorts of models of injuries. And I really like this one. It's called the Swiss cheese. So the Swiss cheese has lots of holes in it, and holes strategically placed around it. So if we slice that Swiss cheese up, and we have a hazard at the top end, if those holes align, then we can go through and a crash or an injury can happen. So there are no layers of defence in this type of Swiss cheese models. Okay, and some of these holes can be due to no countermeasures, behaviour, the road infrastructure. If that's not aligned with what we need to do, we'll have those holes, and then it'll result in an error and result in an injury. Okay, so that type of system, if you like, is an inherently flawed system because it's allowing problems to get to the end with a crash. If we change that around and get rid of some of those holes at certain layers, so each slice is a real opportunity for us to stop that error from occurring. Okay, so the more defences that we put up, for example, police enforcement, road infrastructure, better vehicles, better people, it means that the fewer the holes are, the smaller the holes, and those events won't get through to becoming an injury. So you're able to stop and catch some of those errors. Okay, so the SAFE system is very much based on that. So let's look at the SAFE system approach. Has anybody heard of the SAFE system approach in road safety? No? Yes? Great. That's really good. The SAFE system approach was introduced in Australia in the early 2000s, I think 2002. And it was first developed in Sweden. They had the Vision Zero approach and the Dutch Sustainable Safety approach. So we developed our SAFE system approach based on those two approaches. So we actually agree that crashes can happen. They will continue to occur despite all of our best efforts to prevent them, particularly by human error. But what we don't accept is that crashes will then result in fatalities or serious injuries. Okay. We also acknowledge that safety interventions need to be based on the best available scientific evidence of what is an effective intervention. And the SAFE system approach also has a main principle of a shared responsibility. So while we understand that people make mistakes, but we do expect our road users to be responsible for complying with all of our system rules that we have around the road system. But then it's up to us as system designers and operators to be responsible for providing a safe system for people to operate in. Okay, is that clear? Those types of principles we're thinking about? Okay, so as I said, when crashes do occur, we can have crashes, but the crash energies need to be reduced to levels that minimise the probability of death and serious injury. Okay, and so that's all about the vulnerability that Nina talked about of people. We can only withstand certain physical forces on our bodies before an injury occurs. So we need to provide a safe and crash-worthy system, forgiving of people making mistakes, but then also accommodates our vulnerability to serious injury. Now, we also need to recognise that all of the components of the safe system and the transport system work together. So it's not just one thing we need to do, we need to look at all of the components together. So that means we need to manage road infrastructure, the speeds that we recommend people to travel at, vehicles and road users themselves, and then all of the interactions between all of those components. So the components of the safe system we have are human, so our biological tolerance and our proneness to errors, the vehicles that we're driving in, so their crashworthiness, the road infrastructure, and that's a crashworthiness thing also. And then to manage that kinetic energy, we need to have safe speeds. Okay, again, all working together. So this is our safe system approach. Recently, we have introduced a fifth dimension, and that is post-trauma care. So an emergency services to help us get to hospital in the shortest possible time and to recover from those injuries. So we have in the middle a system that is free of death and serious injury, and it's about the person, the injuries and the deaths. Then we have the roadsides, safe speeds, safer vehicles and safer people. And then on the outside, there are all sorts of things that we can do about it. So we can look at legislation and enforcement, leadership and capability, education and information, admission into the system, so licensing to be able to drive, and then also the research in understanding crashes and risks. So if we look a little bit in further detail about what we mean by these four components, so when we talk about making roads safer, we need to design our roads and roadsides to reduce the risk of crashes, and then if a crash does occur, the severity of that crash. So safe roads prevent unintended use through design and encourage safe behaviour. So we can actually change people's behaviour with the road environment, as well as providing a safe environment if there is a crash. I think safe speeds is a key element of the safe system approach. So we need to set our speed limits to encourage people to drive at a speed that complements the road environment that they're driving on. Again, this is all to manage the crash impact forces to within that human tolerance level. And of course, we want all road users to comply with those speed limits that are set. Safer vehicles, which we will talk about a little bit more in the session this afternoon. So we need to make sure that people are driving vehicles that not only lessen the likelihood of a crash and then protects the occupants, but also simplifies the task and protects vulnerable road users. And there's lots of good technologies now and emerging that do protect us and help us with the driving tasks. So we're introducing vehicles that communicate with roads and other vehicles and automatic protective systems when crash risk is elevated. We'll talk a little bit about that in the following slides. And of course, our safe people. So we need to encourage people to interact in the road environment in a safe way, consistent with compliant behaviour. So things like education, well-informed road users, and we can do that through the licensing system, enforcement and sanctions. So that's all part of how we can ensure that people are interacting together in a safe way. Now, in terms of the safe system and older road users pose a bit of a challenge to the way we think about the safe system. So currently older drivers represent about 6% of all road fatalities in Victoria and Australia, and that is expected to double in the coming decades. And it's for some of the reasons that Nina was explaining. So population ageing, older adults are wanting to drive more and for longer. So, you know, we're expecting that to increase. So if we're really serious about achieving safe system objectives, so we can't ignore the fatality levels that we see amongst older drivers. That's current and expected. The vulnerability of older drivers, and as Nina said, that's a major determinant of injury outcome. And really looking at older drivers' travel and crash patterns, they're quite different than younger drivers. So let's go through each of those safe system components. So what do we do in terms of trying to achieve safer speeds? So we know that the impact of speed on crash and injury risk is very, very clear. So as we increase risk, increase speed, the risk of death or serious injury increases exponentially. Okay, and it's the crucial issue, and particularly for vulnerable or unprotected road users. I have a question for you. What speed would you think that a pedestrian is likely to be killed if they were hit by a car? Ah, you're good. Yeah, anybody else? Okay, 40, yes, but we would prefer 30. So if we look at the graphs in terms of pedestrian injury, again, it's an exponential increase, and from an impact speed of 30 to 40 kilometres an hour, the likelihood of death increases from about 10-15% up to 80%. Okay, so that's the sort of speeds that we're looking at, that we really need to have those sorts of speed limits when there is a mix of vulnerable road users and vehicles. And there's been a lot of psychology in terms of how people choose a speed to travel at. We know that people, again, making errors, we constantly overestimate what a safe speed is. So we will often say, oh, I'm okay, I can drive at this speed, I'm safe. So we actually can't rely on people to choose a safe speed to travel at. So we need something to help them. So there's speed limits, and they do have a very large influence on a driver's or a rider's choice of speed. And invariably, if we see speed limits go down, we will see crash incidents and crash severity go down as well. So speed limits are really important. But they also need to be credible and matched to the environment. So if you have a wide road with 4 lanes and you have a speed limit of 40 kilometres an hour, do you think people would drive at 40 kilometres an hour? No, unfortunately, because it's not matched. So in addition to the speed limits, people also take the cues of the environment into their decision to choose a speed limit. So what we need to do, we have our speed limits, but then we need to increase the speed enforcement, but then introduce other things in the road environment, like traffic calming measures. So particularly when there's a mix of pedestrians and cyclists with cars, we can narrow roads, we can change the alignments of the road, use surface treatments, use speed humps, raised intersection. So that all says to a driver, oh, I'm in an area where I shouldn't be speeding, so I will reduce my speed. Okay. So, we talked about pedestrians and what speed limits are good for pedestrians. Let's have a look at other types of crashes. And I think a lot of people are quite surprised at these types of figures. Many people think that our cars will protect us in a high-speed crash. Even the best cars cannot protect us in any of these crashes above any of those kilometres per hour. So you can see even in a car head-on, sorry, that's down the bottom, a car cannot protect us in a collision anything above 70 kilometres an hour. Now you think about that, you know, when we're driving on the highways, freeways, we're often driving at 100, 110 kilometres an hour. If we have a crash in those environments, our car cannot protect us. Okay? If we look at a side impact into a tree or a pole, that's a very low tolerance level we have there. So a crash in the side into a tree or pole, our car will only protect us at about 40 kilometres an hour. Okay, so it's really important to think about how our cars can and cannot protect us. Okay, so let's talk about safer speeds and older road users. So speed is a problem for older road users, but it's not because of them. They generally don't speed. Their challenges are related very much to others' driving speeds. And as Nina said before, so an increased frailty means that older adults are more likely to sustain a more severe injury than younger adults. And they take much longer to recover from an injury, if they even do. Not only is that the fragility and vulnerability a problem, high-speed environments are also difficult for older road users to negotiate. Nina talked about the cognitive issues of being able to recognise a hazard, respond to it, and then take other actions. And so older people need much more time to respond. So the high-speed environments are very difficult for them. So as I said before, speed reduction is really a key safe system element, particularly for older adults. Okay, if we look at the safer roads and roadsides, it's easy to do, but it costs a lot of money. Improved road design can achieve significant reductions in casualty crashes and do it very quickly, but it's an enormous investment from governments. But over the last 10-15 years, the Victorian Government has invested significant funds in the safer roads and infrastructure programs and has made many major safer road initiatives. Particularly what we tend to do is really addressing the high priority areas. So intersections are high priority, particularly signalised intersection, so making sure there's speed regulation, adequate sight distances, well-designed roundabouts, low entry angles, good sight zones. For vulnerable road users, we need to separate them, and we can do things like separating bicycles and motorbikes and pedestrians from vehicles. Vehicle-to-vehicle collisions, we have invested very heavily in good barrier systems and also invested heavily in grade separation, and particularly of railway crossings on arterials. For older drivers, so we know that the majority of crashes occur on urban roads, and they're predominantly in low speed zones. As Nina said before, the majority of crashes with older drivers do occur at intersections, and that's where they have lots of difficulty in making gap selection when they're making in Australia it's a right-hand turn in front of oncoming vehicles. When there are stop and give way signs present, when there's lack of a full control traffic signal, or poor channelization and delineation. So major problems at intersections. And of course that's all exacerbated by high vehicle speed, high volumes and restricted sight distance. So what we really need to do is make appropriate intersection design and operation that offers older drivers enough time to assess the traffic, make an appropriate decision, and then carry out the task. Just a little bit more about measures to improve intersections, particularly for older adults. We put a lot of roundabouts in our urban areas, and it's a great intervention. It absolutely simplifies the gap selection task, reduces the vehicle speeds, but then it will reduce the crash severity because there's more favourable collision angles, not being a right angle collisions, but more favourable angles. We can provide fully controlled right turn phases. That separates the traffic flow and absolutely removes that gap selection tasks that older adults have problems with. And then we can provide adequate sight distances. Okay, on to safer vehicles. This is really another great way to ensure that we reduce fatalities and serious injuries. And it has been estimated if all drivers were in safer vehicles, we could achieve a 40% reduction in fatalities. Okay, so we need to really think about the vehicles that we're travelling in. Remember that graph that I showed before, that the speeds that we can only withstand. So one thing we can do is provide the optimum crash conditions in the event of a collision, and this is the crash worthiness of a vehicle. So you can see on the left-hand side there, that is a very uncrash-worthy vehicle. So it crumples, but it also crumples the vehicle occupant capsule. So we don't want that, and we don't want those kinematic forces to reach the passengers. So on the right-hand side, you can see we can have that crumple zone, but as long as the cabin remains fairly intact, that's a much better solution. And of course, with airbags and other safety features. So here's just a bit of a graphic about the types of features that we have in cars these days, and they're avoidance and injury mitigation types of features. So early on in the event of a collision, we can look at driver state sensing, so fatigue detection, alcohol detection via interlocks, give people improved information by night enhanced vision systems, daytime running lights. Then we've got the ADAS, the Advanced Driver Assistant Warning Systems. So we've got things like lane departure warning, following distance warning, intelligent speed assist systems. And then in the event of a hazard or a collision, we've got that injury mitigation, so occupant protection, and that's restraint systems, airbags, anti-lock brake systems, brake assist systems, and electronic stability control. So we've got a lot of things in our toolbox, and more are emerging, but these are the types of features that we need in newer cars. Okay, so if we look at safer vehicles for older road users, I'm going to skip that one and turn to this one. So we need to ensure for older drivers that they are in safer vehicles. So again, given their physical vulnerability, they need added protection in the event of a crash. Now, many older people don't know about technologies or don't want to engage with technology, so we need to address our gaps in knowledge and misconceptions on vehicle safety features. I'll talk in much more detail about this in the next session. But if we can give information on vehicle purchase to older drivers, I think it can really help them. So encourage them to buy the newest and largest vehicles that they can afford and handle. And choose vehicles that have safety features like airbags, good restraint systems, force limiting seatbelts, head restraints, braking systems, and we need some stronger promotion of vehicle crashworthiness ratings as a key factor. So I don't know if people heard of NCAP, so National Car Assessment Program. It's very much a European-based program. So it really has star ratings of all new cars, and so that's very, very accessible for the general population. So if you're buying a new car, you can look at these ANCAP ratings and know what safety features that you will have in your car and whether it will protect you or not. In Australia, we've also developed some used car safety ratings, based very similarly on the NCAP star rating. So people can really look at these resources and be aware of what type of car that they're buying. Some research a little while ago really looked at the potentially beneficial applications for older drivers. And really how they protect older drivers in common crash types that they have. I think I've talked about all of these before, but these can be very, very beneficial for older drivers. Now, I don't know whether I'll be able to show this. This is some crash testing. Oh, it goes. There we go. Okay, so these are the ANCAP ratings that they crash test newer vehicles and make sure that they're to certain standards. Okay, now turning to people. So how can we ensure that we've got safer people using the road system? So we make mistakes, we know that. It's a shared responsibility, which I mentioned before. And that it's an expectation that we behave responsibly and adopt safe practices while using the transport system. So we've got a lot of tools in our toolkit to make people safer road users and a lot of behavioural interventions. So the current priorities we have in Victoria are the licensing system. So for learner and new novice drivers, the licensing system, so entering into the system, but then also exiting. And loss of licence for illegal behaviours. We have invested in mass media campaigns and educational approaches, so they're really raising the awareness of issues and how to combat them. We have a number of education and training programs, particularly for learner drivers, skills training, but they really do need to be relevant to the road user groups. Laws and sanctions, but also enforcement strategies. Our police are very heavily invested in addressing illegal behaviours and repeat offenders. So for older road users, as Nina said before, the majority of older drivers are safe drivers. They reduce their amount of driving, that self-regulation that she talked about before, when and where they drive. But at some point, most older drivers will need to start that process of thinking about ceasing driving and seeking alternative mobility options. As we said before, it is a difficult decision, not only for the older driver themselves, but for their family and community. So there are some additional measures that we can put into place. So training and education, assessment of fitness to drive, and the licensing system. So really looking at are there conditional licenses that we can offer. Then going into some sort of medical review and then monitoring and maintenance of driving skills. So I think the key messages too for safer road users, if we're looking at vulnerable road users, walking and cycling in safe areas, selecting safe gaps in the traffic, wearing high visibility clothing and helmets, understanding traffic laws, and maintaining really good skills. For drivers and riders, making sure that there are appropriate speeds, no distractions and impairments, and choosing the safest vehicle. Okay, so in conclusion, we really need to, we want to make sure that we are achieving a safe system and achieving the objectives and the principles of safe system, but we can't ignore the vulnerability of some road users, and that includes older road users, and that's a major determinant of an injury outcome. So our system needs to be designed to protect our most vulnerable. And of course, we cannot not consider mobility and health in this factor. Environmental impacts of active travel are also important. So thank you, and I'll be really happy to answer any questions. Got any questions?
Okay, I have one.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the recommendation about lower speed, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I can recall that 55 Alive was a big campaign in the United States, and it clearly traffic safety engineers and road safety people were very happy about this. But the political backlash, that they encounter, I mean, it's a real issue in terms of, you know what's right, you know what the policy is, and yet you have, you have the opponents, and so it's almost as if you need these strategies for how to deal with the political environment that you're in terms of being able to enforce it and to get the buy-in. You did address clearly. You addressed in terms of the awareness and education and the type of the road environment and enforcement. But I think it is something that people who want to advocate for all this, we really need to have those strategies to be able to, cut through.
Absolutely agree, and we have the same opponents, if you like, to reducing speeds. I guess I think one of our successes has been, as I said before, those really strong partnerships between the key stakeholders, so the government agencies, the researchers, the evidence. So, whenever there is that opponents to reducing speed limits, that we're all giving the same messages. And I think that's a really key. So that political thing, I think if we are on the same page. And I must say, in the last 10 years or so, local governments, councils are really getting on board with the 30km/h speed limits. A number of them have introduced them on their residential streets, not on the arterials that go through, but then the councils then will have that community engagement and let people understand the benefits of those lower speed limits. So I think it's getting those partnerships together and people giving those key messages to those naughty opponents. Yes?
I'm a sociologist, so I completely get where you're coming from as a social scientist as well, but I know we have a lot of engineering students here, so I wanted to ask if you could, I know you've done so already, but I wanted to ask if you could highlight the importance of human and psychological behavior again in traffic safety, as well as how technological solutions and the human solutions can actually complement each other in promoting road safety.
We probably will talk more about that this afternoon, actually, I think, and maybe Nina will too. Yes, where do I start? As we said before, like the safe system approach accepts that we make mistakes. And that's okay, we can, as long as those mistakes don't result in a fatality or a serious injury. In terms of how humans interact with technologies and the like. We've got to design the technologies in a way that they can interact with them for a start. And that's not always easy. And, you know, a lot of, particularly vehicle technologies, they, you know, are exploding, and they're often designed not with that human interface, unfortunately. So, you know, they're often not taking that research in. So, you know, we sort of have to go back to square one with some of the technologies. But yeah, I hope I've answered your question. Yep. Great. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much for a nice presentation. So I saw in your presentation you saw an application of the safety system in the intelligent transportation system is about like a warning system. So my question is, like, currently lots of warning systems are sending info to the vehicle itself. So I'm wondering the feasibility of a warning system sending information to the pedestrian. Do you think it is like a feasible way to put a warning system that designed for sending the information to the pedestrian, helping interact with the vehicle, as you mentioned, like some old people might not make a correct decision when they do in a situation.
Yeah. So are you talking about a pedestrian?
Yes, a
Yeah.
warning system specifically designed sending information to the pedestrian.
Yeah, I don't. There aren't warning systems as such, but there are recent technical crossing systems. So they won't send actual warning systems, but they will detect when a pedestrian arrives at the crossing signal, and then they'll kick in when the lights will change, and they can monitor how fast a pedestrian walks across the road. So if you have an older pedestrian who's walking very slow, those crossing signals will be extended, if you like. So, yeah, I'm not aware of any warning systems for pedestrians in terms of technical stuff. But yeah, I think, you know, there are flashing lights and things like that in the environment. But it's a good suggestion, though. Yeah. Okay.
Jackie, I think it's an excellent suggestion, because we think about, I mean, we're not there yet, but we've got the vehicle to vehicle and the vehicle to road. But I haven't really heard about the vehicle to pedestrian.
No.
So I think you're onto something. I think that that would be, and it's not without the realm of possibility to think that there should be a vehicle to pedestrian kind of route.
Yeah, and you've actually reminded me of something else that we did some work on blind and low vision pedestrians and the issues that they have, and particularly with bicycles and hybrid electric vehicles that they can't hear. And so we put forward some recommendations that vehicles need to have some sort of warning system. And as Nina said, that's possible to do. Maybe just doesn't have that political will yet. But there are definitely warning systems. There's the potential for warning systems to be in vehicles. Thank you. Yes.
First, we thank you for your interesting presentations, and in addition to the presentations, like Professor Nina also argues that the safer car with the addition of the safe stop is very important, and is the key factors to achieve the zero price. And so, not only entering of the super AC society in Korea, but also the poverty rates of the AIDS people in Korea is very kind of challenging to us. I heard that the poverty rate of the people in Korea is about 40%, which is much higher compared to other countries in the cities, 3 times or 4 times. So I'm wondering that the old people in Korea cannot decide very easily to purchase the I want to ask that your country or the U.S. Have any policies to cover the affordable participants?
That's a very good question, and I think we encourage people to purchase the vehicle that the largest that they can handle, but then it is also obviously within their budgets, and that is a difficult one. In Australia, to my knowledge, there are no policies or incentives apart from insurance, maybe. You might get lower insurance rates if you purchase a newer vehicle, but Nina might know in the US.
The only thing I can think of is that sometimes the Veterans Administration for certain populations. But however, this raises an interesting point that maybe in some of these aftermarket features that can be encouraged in the vehicle as long as people understand, as long as it is done professionally, might be one approach. But you raise a really important issue. I was also, to follow up on that, I think that the tendency is for individuals who are single drivers or to purchase smaller cars, not larger. So it's like, is that just a hunch that I have, or are a bunch of people going for larger, safer vehicles, or are they going for smaller vehicles?
Yeah, probably a gender difference there, I think. I think older women would probably go for smaller to handle that. There is a tendency in Australia, not just amongst older people, but young people to be buying these massive vehicles, the trucks, the utilities, and they're just, so dangerous and not necessary driving around in urban areas.
So the messaging, the education, the awareness, and really understanding the stakeholders, if you talk about in terms of the partnerships and the buy-in, it's just so critical.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. Great question, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Dimitri.
I'm just curious, so I feel US and Korea has very strong motor vehicle industry. So I think in the power decision making, the automobile industry stakeholders influence. So I got the sense that US and Korea has less regulatory about older driver compared to Canada and Australia. I think Canada and Australia have their own the automobile companies. So I think it's very political analysis, and I'm just curious, who are the primary stakeholders to make the decisions about regulating older driver in Australia as comparing to other
You're talking about in the vehicles that they're purchasing?
Yes.
Yeah. You're right. We don't have any car manufacturers anymore in Australia. We used to. And now we import so many different vehicles. There's vehicles that I've never even seen on the roads these days. And I think generally there are some quite strict regulations about what's imported into Australia, I think. But then another point to make, it's not just the manufacturers, it's the dealers, the dealerships who, when people are purchasing a new car or a used car, the dealers, the car salesmen, they don't talk about safety at all. And I think they've got a really critical role to play in assisting people to make those really good choices. But it doesn't really happen.